Hello, hello, hello. I know everyone's getting something to eat, and I'll wait just a second to get so you can get through the line a little, just a little. But while you're doing that, let me make a few announcements. And first of all, let me welcome you to CCA's 2016 annual convention. I'm Steve Berry, the President and CEO of CCA. Pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for coming to Seattle to join us. On behalf of everyone, the board members, we just finished, I think, a successful annual meeting and gave our report to everyone. I'm very pleased to see everyone here getting something to eat. I was also very pleased to see everyone that I saw last night at the ball game. That was absolutely wonderful event. Safeco Field, I think the only thing was missing was a win from the Mariners, but I understand there's a couple of people out here that were sort of glad the Mariners didn't win, so welcome to Seattle. I've never seen a Safeco Field taken over by any field taken over by another team's I guess fan base. Dave Miller tells me that they brought all of Vancouver down to Seattle for the game. Okay, I'd also like to thank our Pinnacle sponsors, everyone, Bright Star, Ericsson, Huawei, Interop Technologies, Nokia, Sprint, T-Mobile, and TNS. Thank you very much. Thank you. And when you see them on the floor, you see them around, let's give them a hand. Please thank them. We could not do this without them. So I'd also like to welcome those of you that are joining us from live streaming this morning. Thanks to our broadcast partner, RCR Wireless. Thank you, RCR. Appreciate it. Now, I know that we still have a line on the food court, but you know, in order to keep on schedule, I think we're going to go in and introduce Mr. Wheeler. I think he's used to plates clinging a little as he's speaking. He's a very focused individual, as you know. So now I would like to turn to our first speaker. I'm very pleased to have with us this afternoon is Mr. Tom Wheeler, Chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. Tom, we're delighted to have you with us, returning to CCA. Appointed by President Barack Obama and unanimously confirmed by the U.S. Senate in 2013, Chairman Wheeler brought with him more than 3 decades of telecommunications experience. He understands telecommunications from many perspectives, including as a policy expert, an advocate, and a businessman. He also understands the sector from the perspective of an entrepreneur, having either started or helped start multiple companies offering innovative cable, wireless, and video communication services. He's been named to both the Cable Television Hall of Fame and the Wireless Hall of Fame, a distinction that led President Obama to jokingly dub him the Bo Jackson of telecom. On a personal note, I've had the privilege to work directly with for Tom Wheeler for 6 years, and I've had the honor of calling him a friend for over 20 years. No other chairman has made such an impact on the telecom world in decades. And his list of experiences are vast, his accomplishments are long and impressive. But without further ado, I'd like to simply turn the floor over to the chairman. Please join me now in welcoming Chairman Tom Wheeler.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, my friend. Thank you, Steve. Hello, everybody. You know, Steve says we've known each other for many years, and that's true, and I'm the beneficiary in that relationship. But one of the things you need to know about Steve is that he doesn't miss a beat. Back in the green room back here, Commissioner Clyburn and I were presented with brown paper bags that each containing a CCA mug. Now that's great advertising, that's really smart, but inside my mug were these. Buckeyes. Symbolic of the number 2 team in the nation, soon to be the national champion, and Steve's understanding that all things Buckeye and the Ohio State University are very important in my life. But, I'm going to get out from behind here and just wander around here and see if I can have kind of a conversation with you all. You're eating, so you've denied me the line that says, I'm the only thing that's standing between you and lunch, because you're lunching. So I guess the variation on that is I'm the only thing that's standing between you and the wisdom of Commissioner Clyburn. And so I'll try and move on and get out of here as quickly as possible. But I did want to share a couple of thoughts with you. I remember when Steve was thinking about renaming RCA CCA. And to paraphrase Jerry Maguire, with that name, you got me at competition. It's the right kind of message. And I love how CCA is now even offering competitive conference choice in the month of September. I was in Las Vegas earlier this month. A small little organization there was having their meeting, and many of you were probably there. And when I visited with them, I referenced how it was 1992 when I became president of CTIA. Now, 1992 was also the year that RCA was formed. And I'm trying not to draw the connection between those two events. But you all started, this organization started with a commitment to delivering wireless service in rural America. It's in your DNA. And so accordingly, I'd like to focus on rural issues today. Because at the Commission, we're following an aggressive strategy to seize the opportunities for mobile in rural America. And not surprisingly, that starts with competition. The first word in your name, because when competition exists, consumers win. It drives innovation, it drives investment, it drives economic benefits. And you all, the members of the Competitive Carrier Association, are key to delivering that kind of competition, especially in rural America. And at the Commission, we want to protect competition where it exists and promote it where it can perhaps be more fulsome. And you fit right in to that agenda, and that's what I'd like to visit with you about today. One of the most effective tools in promoting competition in the wireless marketplace is roaming. It goes back to the early 1980s. To compete in the mobile marketplace, carriers must be able to offer nationwide coverage. And roaming agreements have made it possible for smaller providers, particularly in rural areas, to do business. In 2011, the Commission's data roaming order was a significant step forward to preserve roaming for the internet age. But our roaming rules are due for a review. It's been a while. In the past 2 years, multiple providers have filed formal complaints and requests for mediation, alleging that data roaming rates offered by large providers are commercially unreasonable. Because of higher rates, we know that some smaller providers have had restrictions and have had to place usage restrictions on what their consumers can do insofar as data roaming traffic. Now, the Commission has helped us successfully mediate specific roaming disputes, but there are reasons for considering further action. There are currently, as you know, 2 frameworks for roaming. In the voice world, it's just and reasonable, and in the data world, it's commercially reasonable. In our 2015 Open Internet Order, the Commission committed to revisiting data roaming and the obligations of mobile providers to offer data roaming. CCA has been very vocal in holding the Commission to its word on this and calling on us to apply uniform roaming standards across voice and data services. We've heard you, and we're ready to act. Before the year is over, I plan to ask my fellow commissioners to adopt a notice of proposed rulemaking on the Commission's data roaming framework. Now I got to pause here a second and look out, and I saw the guy who started that clapping, and it's great to look out and see Pat Reardon, particularly when he's leading the applause. But tackling this issue will allow the Commission to provide greater certainty in the marketplace and promote consumer benefits and competition. Now, while nurturing competition is always going to be option A for maximizing consumer benefits, that's not always an option that is available in all parts of the country. Indeed, many rural areas do not have access to rural broadband at all. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But the Commission has an affirmative responsibility to make sure that Americans have access to our nation's critical communications networks. And that's where the Commission's Universal Service Fund comes in. In 2011, the Commission adopted landmark reforms to the Universal Service Program, reorienting this 20th century voice-based activity to a 21st century broadband connectivity. And one of the big innovations of the revamped USF was to create the Mobility Fund to spur deployment of advanced wireless infrastructure and replace the old CETC support, which the Commission determined was not well targeted. The Commission is now working on moving forward on Mobility Fund 2 by the end of this year. Now, at a high level, here's what I see as the keys to this decision that we'll make before the end of the year. First, we need to identify where there is actually no 4G LTE coverage. There's an old saying that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Well, when it comes to measuring wireless coverage in America, our record, quite frankly, is, just like many rural areas, coverage spotty. The problem is, in how we collected the data. For the one-time support plan in the first phase of the Mobility Fund, we relied on a third party and used the data of census blocks at a census block level, which is getting pretty small, to make those kind of judgments. But it turns out that wasn't granular enough, particularly for the geography of rural areas and how census blocks tend to be geographically large in rural areas. We also fell into the trap that doing things on a census block area created a situation where the west side of the census block might have service, but the east side didn't. But nonetheless, we put a check in that box that said there's service in that census block. So here's how we're going to fix it. Here's how we are fixing it. Twice a year, as you know, the Commission requires mobile carriers to submit Form 477, which contains network coverage data. This data also allows the Commission to create a significantly more detailed picture of actual wireless coverage within the census block. So instead of generalities about the whole census block, we can drill deeper to see if there's coverage here, but not coverage there. And by the end of this month, we expect to release in a public notice an analysis of this 477 data. You got to wait a couple of weeks for the details, but let me give you the preview of coming attractions. The main takeaway is that there is a clear need for Mobility Fund. The data confirms what everyone knew from experience, that significant LTE coverage gaps still exist throughout America. Excluding Alaska, 11% of the nation's road miles have no 4G LTE coverage at all, including no subsidized coverage. We now know that 16% of all square miles in the country have no coverage or only subsidized coverage. And that means that 1.4 million Americans currently have no access to 4G LTE coverage at all, and 1.7 million live in areas where the only LTE coverage relies on subsidy. Now, it's no accident that I have been describing unserved areas as areas without access to 4G LTE. 4G is table stakes for wireless connectivity in 2016. As we're gearing up for 5G, we can't consign parts of the country to second-class digital citizenship by settling for 3G service. So if the first key to the Mobility Fund is better measurement, the second key is using this new data to make sure that our investments are properly focused and that that focus is clear. Unserved areas. I'm part of the broad bipartisan coalition that supports the Walden Rule, which says that we should not use taxpayer funds, ratepayer funds, to support service in an area that is served by an unsubsidized provider. The Walden Rule's namesake, Representative Greg Walden, represents a rural congressional district in Oregon that is as big as the state of Ohio, an important reference point as far as I'm concerned. So this is a person with real world experience dealing with rural connectivity issues. He's also chairman of the House Telecommunications Subcommittee, the FCC's Oversight Committee, and a real policy thought leader on telecom issues. And so although the idea of non-duplication is clearly a settled policy principle, it raises very real challenges. Every USF dollar used to support duplicative service is a dollar that is not available to bring service to the more than 550,000 miles of unserved roads where somebody might have to make a 911 call. That just won't do. But having said that, we recognize that there has been reliance on these subsidies for the provision of duplicated services. We can't just go cold turkey. But we must have a responsible phase-out period. And that's why the third big challenge for the Mobility Fund is going to be phasing out support in a way that is fair to those who have been receiving universal service funding in duplicative situations. And in the months ahead, I look forward to working with CCA in order to get this right. But let's be clear. The FCC's mandate is to support service where there is none. And diverting dollars from that purpose is not in the long-term public interest. Okay, so far, I've been talking mainly about expanding the availability of today's mobile broadband networks. Let's talk now about tomorrow's. Let's talk about 5G. Where today's wired and wireless networks force customers to choose either high speed and capacity or mobility, 5G promises gigabit mobile connections at any location. The limitations of speed, capacity, and latency are about to become history, and those changes will define our future. Fiber-fast wireless connectivity will deliver the long-sought goal of competitive, high-speed internet access for rural consumers. C-Spire, for instance, successfully tested 5G in a fixed wireless environment in its home state of Mississippi, reaching speeds of 2 gigabits per second. Now, whether it's 5G or the ubiquitous delivery of 4G into unserved areas, there are three keys for what the Commission must do. The first is ensuring ample availability of spectrum to a range of competitors. And on that front, the FCC has opened the door to what I call the spectrum trifecta. We've targeted low-band, mid-band, and high-band airwaves that make available unprecedented amounts of spectrum. After years of work, we are finally in the midst of the historic incentive auction to make available greenfield low-band spectrum. We've created a market in the incentive auction that makes available a significant amount of prime beachfront spectrum in the 600 megahertz band. And we created the first ever market-based spectrum reserve to provide competitive carriers like you and new entrants the opportunity to obtain a portion of this valuable resource. As you know, the first stage of the spectrum auction closed when the cost to clear 126 megahertz of broadcast spectrum exceeded the bid prices of the carriers. We resumed bidding last week in the reverse auction to determine the cost to clear a reduced amount, 114 megahertz of spectrum. And following the close of stage 2 of the reverse auction, we will again turn to the forward auction to determine whether the spectrum is worth that much to you. The incentive auction, however, is just part of the spectrum trifecta. The Commission's record-setting AWS-3 auction and creation of the new Citizens Broadband Radio Service in the 3.5 gig band are landmarks in using new sharing tools to open up more mid-band spectrum in multiple forms, whether exclusive, shared spectrum, shared access, or unlicensed. And such sharing will only become more important, which is why we're aggressively pushing to make the spectrum access system a reality with 3.5 gigahertz and beyond. And of course, this summer, the FCC approved an order making the U.S. the first country in the world to open up high-band spectrum for 5G networks and applications. And in order to give this industry the opportunity to lead the world in 5G, we did it in record time, only 9 months from proposal to final decision. The second key component of the Commission's strategy is fostering competitive provision of infrastructure, specifically backhaul. Regardless of the spectrum allocation, 5G will require a lot more cells, particularly at the higher frequencies. These small cell sites will need to be connected, so we'll need a lot more backhaul. But backhaul, as you know, isn't just about 5G. If there's going to be universal wireless coverage, there needs to be fair access to backhaul. In many cases, competition for the supply of backhaul remains limited. And that can translate into higher costs for wireless networks, higher prices for consumers, and an adverse impact on competition. CCA filed a study with the Commission last month echoing this assessment. I appreciate your engagement on this issue because you put on the record a very important benchmark. The fact that backhaul accounts for about 1/3 of cell site operating costs. Before the end of this year, I will present the Commission with a reform proposal that will tackle this issue and encourage innovation and investment in what we now call business data services, while ensuring that the lack of competition in some places cannot be used to hold back wireless coverage. You should know that the message delivered by this organization has been a key component in this, and that every major wireless carrier in America, save one, is supportive of this kind of reform necessary to have competitive backhaul access. And this brings us to the third issue in 5G, which is siting. Estimates are that 5G will require a 10x growth in cell sites and potentially significantly more. That's hundreds of thousands of new antennas, hundreds of thousands of siting decisions, which raises a key question. How can we work with the siting authorities to allow the plethora of antennas that will be required for this quickly and at reasonable cost? One thing we must do is to tell the story of 5G. And that's not in terms of technology. You know, we get all wrapped up in, oh, here's what the engineering description of 5G is. We need to talk about it in terms that make sense to real people. We need to tell the story of what 5G is, or we will be unsuccessful in dealing with the NIMBYism and the recalcitrance of local authorities if all we talk about is engineering. We have to help leaders at the local level, at all levels for that matter, understand that 5G is what makes the Internet of Things real. But even discussing the Internet of Things is too obtuse. Let's talk about the benefits of smart city grids. Let's talk about the benefits of safe transportation networks, the new opportunities to improve healthcare that you're going to hear Commissioner Clyburn talking about in just a minute. Let's paint the picture of how 5G will unleash immersive education and entertainment industries, and how 5G will unlock new ways for your communities to increase employment, whether it's a small specialty shop or a large factory, creating jobs and improving service for the community. It's also necessary to explain the nature of 5G technology doesn't just mean more antenna sites. It also means that without antenna sites, you may not have 5G opportunities. You know, it's different from where we've been before, where you deny service in this area, but this high-power antenna over here still allows people to have service even though they don't have an antenna. You don't have an antenna now, it is highly unlikely you're going to have the benefits of 5G service, and we need to deliver that message. Furthermore, the nature of the technology makes the review and approval by community siting authorities and our working with them all the more important. The costs and fees that are assessed by those local siting authorities are something that collectively we're going to have to deal with. You know, there are just over 200,000 cell towers in the U.S., but there may be millions of cell sites in the 5G future. If siting for a small cell takes as long and costs as much as siting for a cell tower, few communities will ever have the benefits of 5G. Now, make no mistake about it, localities play a vital role in the siting process, and they have important and legitimate rights. But those rights don't extend to blocking a national broadband pathway for all citizens. Given the importance of the ubiquitous expansion of 4G and the rollout of 5G to the economic future of this nation, it is not reasonable for localities to view cell site deployment as a potential new revenue stream, which is something that we're seeing far too often. It is not reasonable for cities to franchise their siting to a third party who acts as a gatekeeper. For our part, the Commission is united in its commitment to cutting red tape and facilitating siting. We've streamlined our environmental and historic preservation rules, we've tightened our shot clock for application reviews, and there is bipartisan commitment to do more as warranted. Both of my Republican colleagues, for instance, have recently agreed that where states or localities are imposing fees that are not fair and reasonable for access to local rights of way, the FCC should step in and preempt them. Now, before I close, those magic words that you were all waiting for, before I close, there are a couple of other important issues that warrant quick mentioning. One, our wireless networks must be secure. The Commission has been engaged with this industry to make sure cybersecurity is addressed in all of our activities, including the build-out of the entire 5G ecosystem. Second, privacy is another important topic. Digital networks create big data, so it's imperative that carriers have privacy policies that enable consumers to understand and control how their personal information about their digital activity is being used. So the bottom line here today is that there is a roadmap to chart both our path to the ubiquitous wireless, LTE, and to our 5G future. Now is the time to make it happen. Now is the time to update our data roaming rules to promote and preserve wireless competition in rural America. Now is the time to move forward with the next phase of the Mobility Fund to ensure that every American can access high-speed wireless connectivity. Now is the time to continue to build the mobile future. I thank you, and with you, I look forward to listening to the next remarks from Commissioner Clyburn. Thank you very much. Thanks, Guy.
Wow. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. And thank you very, very much for being here with us at CCA. It's always enlightening.